Welcome. In Islamic prayer, there are some things that are just fundamental. They're the absolute basics. But what happens when a major historical figure, a leader, is accused of getting the most basic part completely wrong? Today we're diving into the source materials that raise some serious questions about the prayers of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and it all centers on the single most important chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha.
So, before we get into the heavy stuff, let's just establish the ground rules. Let me ask you this. What is the one part of Islamic prayer, of salat, that you absolutely positively cannot skip? The one non-negotiable component.
And there's our answer, right from Prophet Muhammad, ﷺ. There is no prayer for the one who does not recite the opening of the book. This isn't just a recommendation, it's not a suggestion, it's an absolute. The statement basically frames Surah Al-Fatiha as the very essence of the prayer. So let's be super clear. No Fatiha, no prayer. It's just null and void.
Okay, so we've established the foundation. That rule is the pillar of prayer we're going to be talking about. With that absolute requirement locked in our minds, let's start looking at the very serious claims that are leveled against Umar. And just so we're all on the same page, Surah Al-Fatiha, the opening, is the very first chapter of the Quran. It's not optional, it's repeated in every single unit, every rak'ah of the 5 daily prayers. So we're not talking about some obscure, rarely recited verse here. This is the absolute bedrock of Muslim worship, day and day out.
Right. Now we get to the heart of the matter. The source materials we're looking at today, they don't just raise a minor issue. They make 2 incredibly specific and frankly shocking allegations against Umar ibn al-Khattab. And both of these claims strike right at that sacred pillar of prayer we just talked about.
And here are the 2 claims, plain and simple. First, that he would just skip the surah, leave it out entirely. And second, and you might find this even more unbelievable, that when he did recite it, he consistently got the words wrong. Let's start with that first claim, the idea of just omitting it.
All right, let's tackle this first allegation head-on. The claim that Umar actually led a prayer and just completely forgot or chose to leave out the most important chapter in the entire Quran.
Our sources zero in on a very specific incident. It happened during the Maghrib, or sunset prayer. The story, which you can find in famous works like the Tafsir by Fakhr al-Razi, says Umar was leading the prayer, and he just completely skipped Surah Al-Fatiha, just didn't say it. But it's what happens after the prayer that is the real core of this allegation. Someone comes up to him and points out, "Hey, you forgot the Fatiha." Now you'd expect him to be concerned, right? But according to the report, he just asks about the physical movements. How was the bowing and prostration? They say they were good. And his reply, then there is no problem. Now, according to the scholars who wrote these sources, this wasn't just him brushing someone off. They see it as him creating his own ruling on the spot. By saying no problem, he was basically suggesting that as long as the physical motions were okay, the required recitation didn't matter. He was allegedly putting his own judgment above the explicit, crystal clear command of the Prophet ﷺ.
Okay, so that's the first claim. But the second one, in many ways, is even more detailed and some would argue more damning. Because this one isn't about a moment of forgetfulness. This is about actively changing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This second claim, which we find in sources like Kitab al-Masahif, alleges that Umar didn't just stumble over a word every now and then. We all do that. No, the claim is that he habitually, as in all the time, recited key words in Surah Al-Fatiha completely differently from the standard, universally accepted text. And here you can see the alleged changes side by side. On the left, you have the standard recitation that every Muslim knows. On the right, what the sources claim Umar would say. For instance, instead of Siratul Ladina, meaning the path of those who, he allegedly said Siratul Man, which means the path of he who. A huge change. And then in the final verse, instead of wala dalin, meaning and not of those who are astray, he would supposedly add another gaidi, making it wa gairi dalin. These aren't just tiny slips of the tongue. They fundamentally alter the structure and meaning of the verses. And here is the linguistic evidence the sources bring to the table. The specific Arabic phrase they use to describe his recitation is kana yaqra. Now that doesn't just mean he read one time. In Arabic, this phrasing implies something that was continuous, a habit, something he did constantly. So the argument isn't that he made a mistake. The claim is that this was his version of Al-Fatiha, his normal, everyday way of reciting the most important chapter in the entire Quran. So, let's just recap. We have two major allegations here. One, that he skipped the surah, and two, that he constantly changed its words. So when you put those two pieces together, what's the logical conclusion? Where do these sources ultimately lead us?
The logic presented in these sources is devastatingly simple. You can break it down into 3 steps. Step 1, a valid prayer requires a valid recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. We've established that. Step 2, the sources present evidence that Umar's Fatiha was invalid, either because he skipped it or because he recited a corrupted version. Step 3, the unavoidable conclusion. Therefore, his prayers were invalid, all of them.
Let the weight of that sink in for a moment. What this argument claims is that for Umar, the most basic, foundational act of daily worship, the very thing that connects a Muslim to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was fundamentally broken. According to these texts, his prayers were worthless, null and void, based on the very standards set by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself.
And so the sources leave us with this one final, incredibly sharp question that just hangs in the air. It's not just a question about recitation, it's a question about his entire authority and status. How could the man who led the entire Muslim community, the Caliph, not have even mastered the very first, most fundamental chapter of the Quran? That's the powerful and, frankly, shocking challenge presented by the material we've examined today.